I'm Peter Ohm, Acting Manager of the current Planning Branch. With me today are Garry Dziwenka, the City of Edmonton's Chief Livery Officer, and Corey Sagan, Manager from the Office of Public Engagement. City Administration's report on the proposed vehicle for hire bylaw 17400 was released today and is now available on the City's website. The proposed bylaw will be considered by Council at its meeting on Tuesday, next week, January 26, beginning at 1:30 p.m. As you know, bylaw 17400 was given first reading on November 17, 2015. Administration supports the bylaw receiving second and third reading on Tuesday with a number of recommended amendments identified in the report. The discussion on and the content of the bylaw has been contentious, and we expect the information contained in the report will spark further public discussion prior to next week's council meeting. Through the report, administrations made recommendations to balance the interests of the public and, at the same time, address the need for a regulatory framework that allows the taxi industry and private transportation providers to coexist. The report responds to a five-part motion passed by Council on November 17, 2015, and provides information based on research from across North America and summaries of major stakeholder and public engagement that administration undertook in the past 2 months. Specifically, the report provides a recommended alternative fee structure for private transportation providers, an update on the status of lawful insurance for private transportation providers in the province of Alberta, fare options with a recommended hybrid option, industry costs in Edmonton, a summary of it, and comparison and information on industry costs in other cities in Canada and the United States, information on potential enforcement actions, and a recommended enactment date for bylaw 17400 if Council approves it next week. Opinion is polarized regarding the vehicle for hire industry. The bylaw and the recommended amendments will be criticized, and administration acknowledges it will not satisfy all stakeholders. However, if approved and enacted, the bylaw will begin to regulate vehicles for hire, provide a means to collect business intelligence for monitoring, and identify potential follow-up actions for unacceptable impacts. Approval of the bylaw also places Edmonton in a leadership position among Canadian municipalities and in developing and implementing a response to the emergence of private transportation providers in the vehicle for hire industry. As you review the report and its 6 attachments, I think you should note that attachment 2 will be quite helpful in understanding the potential amendments to the bylaw being proposed by administration to the bylaw that we did receive first reading back in November. This attachment does include administration's recommended fee structure to be applied, and attachment 3 describes, so the fee structure is this, and attachment 3 describes the potential fare options, of which there are status quo and 5 additional identified options. Attachment 6 then, quite a lengthy document, contains an overview of the engagement results that we did conduct in the last 2 months. Bylaw 17400, as received first reading in November, requires proof of insurance approved by the Superintendent of Insurance for the province of Alberta and complying with provincial law, annual vehicle inspections, an appropriate provincial driver's license, and criminal record checks. The bylaw also establishes a new class of dispatcher for regional and commercial PTPs and increases fines for non-compliance from $1,000 to $5,000. On the topic of insurance, commercial insurance policies are available in Alberta for vehicle for hire. Subject to approval from the Superintendent of Insurance, other insurance models may be available in the future that better meet the needs of PTPs and vehicles for hire. No licenses will be issued, however, under a new bylaw unless proof of insurance approved by the Superintendent is presented. Our understanding is that Superintendent of Insurance and staff have met with Uber and Intact representatives and are still working towards a solution that meets the minimum standards for automobile insurance in Alberta. Further updates would need to be pursued and confirmed by those parties. In administration's view, the remaining important decision Council needs to make before finalizing the bylaw next week, potentially, are a fee structure, which includes an accessibility charge of $20,000 for PTPs, an annual fee for PTPs based on a flat amount and a per kilometre rate. Secondly, a fare model, under which taxis will apply a fixed rate for street hails, and both taxis and PTPs will have an option of variable rates for dispatched rides. And finally, a date of an enactment. Administration does recommend June 1st, 2016, but we also note another suitable date would be September 1st of the same year. As to engagements, I'll just touch on a few highlights. Stakeholders were asked for inputs on two aspects of the proposed vehicle for hire bylaw, being fees and fares. The public was only engaged on the aspect of fares and only in the aspect of the taxi industry. Vehicle for hire participants were engaged through the industry advisory group, workshops, meetings, and an online survey in which both industry and Uber participants were invited to complete. Public input was collected through approximately 430 random telephone survey, and the Edmonton Insight community, and an open link on the city's website. In total, it was approximately 3,500 responses. The random telephone surveys were conducted by a third party, and it was undertaken in two parts. Approximately 200 were interviewed prior to New Year's Eve or day, and the remainder were completed after January 4th. Some of the highlights of our research are notable in that the public felt that one of the most important things to address was cost to the customer, and a fairness in terms of a fee and a fare model between the taxi industry and the PTPs, like Uber. Access and safety are also very important factors for the user experience, and understanding how fares are charged and the fares themselves are the next most important factors to the public. There was a clear difference between the taxi industry and Uber around the fare model that's being recommended by administration. And the majority of the public, however, supports specified fares followed by maximum fares and then negotiated fares for specific destinations. So, in conclusion, we believe the bylaw with recommended amendments will modernize the vehicle for hire bylaw and establish a regulatory framework under which both the taxi industry and private transportation providers can coexist. We trust the information that's provided in the report and in the presentation and in the Q&A that we expect as part of the deliberation of the bylaw will provide City Council with the ability to make an informed decision on next steps. So we'll take your questions.
Peter, can you describe the commercial private transportation provider dispatch, the 50,000 to 20,000? So that would be paid by Uber itself and not any of the drivers. Can you just elaborate?
Uber is an example of an operator here in the city, correct? But it would apply to any other PTP that might enter the market. So the $50,000 is the flat rate. The remainder of the fee structure that applies to a PTP would be a per kilometre charge. The $20,000 charge is really a contribution to ensure the sustainability of the accessible taxis.
Why move in this direction where the company itself pays this big fee and then move to this per kilometre rate? Why do you think that's?
In the case of Uber, they chose to take on both the dispatcher's fee and the driver's fee, and this was the model that they've identified.
Based on the document that we're seeing here, though, it looks like you're also charging the driver 25% of each ride. Is that correct?
I'm not sure where that comes from.
It says 25% of fare per trip charge under commercial PTP. Is that what?
I'm going to have to refer you to our Chief Livery Officer on that. Perhaps we could do that after you conclude your questions with me. Yeah.
When you're charging per ride, how are you going to hold Uber accountable to make sure they're actually paying that amount to the city?
We also have identified in the bylaw the requirement to access their business information so that over the course of a year we'll be able to monitor what that is, and that'll be input to an ongoing adjustment to the fee structure as well.
And in what manner are you going to be accessing their records? Is it going to be a random audit? Are you going to have real-time access to their records?
That's still to be arranged, but our intent is to have access to enough information to be able to adjust the fees on that basis.
So what
So
if these
it's
companies
per
don't
trip or
provide
per
the information?
kilometer?
Oh, sorry.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Can I clarify? Like, you said 6 cents per kilometer, but the bylaw, the report says per trip. But it's per kilometer or
It's
per trip?
it's per kilometer.
Okay.
Yeah,
So it'd be probably at least 20 cents or larger per trip.
I would think so. That's per trip. Sorry, Gary Dziwenka corrected me. It's per trip. It's per trip. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So what if these companies don't provide the information? Does that then give the city owners to pull their license?
That would I consider a breach. Yes, that would be a requirement.
What is Uber's reaction to, what have they had to say about the city accessing their records? I know they've resisted that with other organizations.
Well, I think you should contact them as to what they've said, but that's going to be a requirement in the bylaw.
How much are the taxi fees changing? I'm not familiar with them previously, so how much are those changing?
Gary, I don't think that they're changing.
$10.
$10? Yeah.
So can you explain how the recommended model for hybrid fares will work? So describe or explain that any prearranged trips is unregulated. So if I call a yellow cab, can I
If you-
negotiate a fare with them? Or?
Well, you're subject to variable rates. If you don't like the rate being offered by one dispatcher, you can certainly call another. So that happens in all dispatch rides under the recommended fare model. And so that would apply both to taxis and to PTPs. However, if you are at a taxi stand or you hail a cab, that's a stipulated rate.
Okay, so basically the cab companies can set their own fares.
If you're being dispatched through a call or an app.
So why kind of go down that path?
Well, the stipulated rate provides that certainty of a fare, and only the cab industry is allowed to take street hails and stand at cab stands.
So are you concerned that there might be confusion with the public saying, well, I was charged this rate when I did a hail, but all of a sudden, for a pre-arranged trip, it's a free flow?
I think that's a good point, and that's in part why we're recommending that the bylaw be enacted at a later date. It'll give us an opportunity, if council passes the bylaw, for us to conduct a campaign around what the changes are so that the public has a clear understanding going forward after the bylaw's enactment, what they can expect in terms of fares.
Can you explain the difference between a regional PTP and a commercial PTP?
Commercial PTP would be one that operates inside the city, and we do have a number of brokers, currently brokers and dispatchers that operate out in the region. So what we've done here is identified dispatchers in the case of the taxi industries, and two other types of dispatchers are those for PTPs and then for regional providers. Yes, Gary?
A commercial PTP is one that has over 200 or over number of cars associated with the PTP dispatcher. So they're the large ones. The regional ones are the smaller ones.
Can you tell me why there's a difference for bigger PTPs than smaller ones?
It's a big difference too.
It-
It's 1,000 a year.
It is, but if you take a commercial PTP that had, let's say, 2,000 cars, and you apply the $400 a car, et cetera, fee, you're going to have a $1.4 million fee for that PTP. That's not in accord with the cost recovery basis of our fee structure.
So if you're a smaller PTP, you pay per head essentially.
You'll pay essentially the same fee as the general dispatch or the taxis pay.
So if a company wants to come in, say Lyft wants to come in, they're not here right now, they're starting out, they're only going to have 10, 20, 50 cabs, so they are going to be paying the regional fee to start out.
Absolutely, it would be based, because of course then for their costs, business costs, it makes sense for them to pay the regional.
Does this not give an unfair advantage to a company that's been operating illegally in Edmonton for a year? I mean, it's an obvious barrier to entry into the industry if you have higher costs for your drivers to join your company and they can join Uber instead, no?
I don't see it that way. What it does is it gives if you're a commercial PTP, it sets you up as a commercial PTP, regional PTP. I think it gives more fairness in the fee structure.
Can you comment on what this means for a business already operating outside the vehicle for hire bylaw, like driving Miss Daisy or something like that, the seniors?
Those specialty associations, we still have to, or specialty businesses, we have to look and assess them. So right now, I can't really comment on a driving mistakes or designated driving service. They're outside the vehicle for hire bylaw right now, so we'll reassess and once we talk with law and.
Okay, so they'd be step 2 basically to see
Absolutely.
where they fall.
That's exactly right.
How come the fare structure of the issue of surge pricing came up recently? Does the fare structure, address any of that, or why did you
No, it doesn't. And that's, there's going to have to be a reliance on the consumer understanding. Again, part of our communication efforts about what the consumer can expect after the bylaw. That'll have to be the awareness of the consumer as to what they're entering into a contract relative to that paradigm, that business model.
Speaking of that, though, are you worried that, is there another side of this? Right now, if I pre-arrange a taxi or if I hail a taxi, I know what the fare is going to be. One of the downsides to ride-sharing companies is they have this surge pricing, and so on evenings when it's busy, like Halloween or New Year's Eve, you can pay really exorbitant rates to get somewhere. If I'm a taxi operator operating on New Year's Eve, isn't there an incentive for me not to take street hails that night and start charging surge rates to get to and from places?
Potentially. And again, if that has a negative impact and it's a consistent negative impact through our monitoring, we may need to respond to that.
Has the city given any more thought to allowing Uber to self-regulate, which is something they were asking for back in September?
We still have to come back to committee on a report on self-regulation. So that's going to be after Tuesday.
Is there stipulation, because if taxis are allowed to set their rates, if they're being called on an app or call, is there stipulation saying that they have to state the price up front like Uber does?
Well, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Further questions?
I've got one. Actually. What's behind the decision not to cap the PTP vehicles?
Again, their business model operates on part-time drivers. Understand between 15 and 25 hours a week, and maybe sometimes not that much. And sometimes they might drive for 3 months. So there's a great deal of variability, and with that number of hours, in terms of being able to achieve a platform that creates a level of access that's pretty even, you need quite a few drivers. But no particular cap. And I think that's, again, what we can understand through the monitoring as to find how that works.
Does this have anything to do with the gray market for actual taxi licenses that's sprung up as a result of the cap that's caused some issues?
Yeah, I think you can appreciate the city has really no part in whatever gray values assigned to plates. There is a transfer rate. It's relatively low. It's charged by the city, but what the market does relative to applying a charge on that's another matter.
Will this change the number of taxi plates available, or is that, do you come back to that later?
We're not proposing to change anything in terms of the numbers. Again, I think that's something for us to monitor and potentially respond to if it's necessary.
So if this passes and ride-sharing services are allowed in, the hybrid fare structure is allowed in, do you think consumers will see potentially lower costs for trips?
I think we're going to see competition, and that may be a result.
Is there a difference between, from a driver's perspective, to say rent from someone who owns a license as opposed to just starting up their own PTP, getting their own PTP license and driving their own?
Garry?
No, I don't see an incentive to either way. What this bylaw does, proposed bylaw does, is open up avenues for not only for the public to choose which provider they want to go with, but also for people that want to be in the industry to choose which way they want to come into the industry.
Doesn't this effectively lift the cap then on the taxi place, since drivers can, there's no limit really for the number of drivers available, or the options available to them?
In terms of the fare model, which anticipates both taxi industry and PTPs to be participants in the vehicle for hire, yes. It increases the amount of drivers that could be on the street.
Who no longer have to rent,
Sorry?
who no longer have to rent from
Garry?
the owners.
That's right. They can go into the PTP model and they can run their own car under there.
So can a cab driver be a PTP driver as well under this?
At the same time,
No, not at
Oh.
the same time, you know, what if they?
Hypothetically?
hypothetically, yes?
Yep.
And can you run through, I know you did workshops with the taxi renters and the taxi companies. Could you run through how their opinions different and how they have, what their reactions were to this bylaw?
I'm going to get Gary to do that. Yep.
Sure, absolutely. Like, as you mentioned, we had facilitated meetings with the industry. The meeting with the taxi licensees, the holders of the licenses, and the brokers were similar. They wanted minimum fares applied. They wanted, as for fees, they wanted the same fee structure across the board for both PTPs and taxis. That was the two main points that they made.
And versus the renters, like the people who don't.
The renters are fairly are in favor of this bylaw in general, because, as the lady mentioned, it does open up them more options than just renting a vehicle from someone.
How do you balance the fee structure between, commercial PTPs and regional and taxis? What was your mindset going in to make sure that it was fair in your mind?
You're talking about the fee structure, you said, sorry. Basically, we're on a cost recovery basis. So we looked at their participation in the industry, and we worked from different formulas, different methodologies, looked at other jurisdictions and what they're doing, their methodologies they used, and we came up with one that's for Edmonton.
How does this,
Just take one more question, okay?
sure, how does this PTP system that's completely open and uncapped affect the value of the capped plates, the taxi license?
The city of Edmonton doesn't recognize the value of
But
the.
it does happen, it goes on.
But we can't comment on that. That's something the industry has created.
Gary, do you anticipate?
Last one.
Okay. Do you anticipate having to hire more staff and bring on more people? Right now, in terms of regulating PTPs, you've just been finding them. You're going to have to oversee them now. Is this going to grow your staff?
That's one of the reasons that we've suggested a come into force date of June 1st, where we'll be looking at resource allocation and what we need for resources going forward.
And this vote, will this increase your budget then?
Potentially,
So that you could hire more staff?
potentially, yes.
Okay.